Let's talk about history. Like, wait a minute, Mr. Brown. I thought this was supposed to be science, right? Yeah, it is science. But we're actually, today's science lesson is actually going to be a history lesson. I'm going to tell you a story today, which is what a wonderful way to have a science lesson is to tell you a story. And it's a true story. And it's about the man you see in front of you in the black and white photo named Samuel Morse. Before we begin, do a little thought experiment. Pause the computer for a second and think about what technology do you think someday will replace the cell phone? How we communicate with each other nowadays. You're thinking, how could anything replace the cell phone, Mr. Brown? Like, it's as good as it gets. Well, something will come along that will replace it, that will make the cell phone seem like an antique. What do you think that will be? So you will hear me tell a story, a real story about a man named Samuel Morse that changed the way the communication happens between people. And it led the way to other forms of communication until what we have today. And we would not have the modern day cell phone if it wasn't for Samuel Morse. It also has to do about waves. We were talking about waves the other day. Some energy travels in waves, right? Light energy and sound energy. We talked about the parts of the wave, which you see in front of you here. Crest at the top, trough at the bottom. The height is called the amplitude, wavelength, and such. So let's begin, shall we? Oh, we're not going to do that. So we're going to say, I'm going to tell you a story, and it takes place in the 1830s. Now, here's the thing. 1830s is before televisions, it's before telephones, it's before the internet, it's before computers. Even 100 years after this story takes place, in the 1930s, only about half of Americans even had electricity. So this goes to show you how long ago this story takes place. Back then, in the early 1800s, if you wanted to send a message to someone, it would have to be delivered by horseback. Whether it was long distances or like a few towns over, you would give the letter to someone, pay them a tiny bit of money, and then someone would get on horseback and deliver that message. Okay? That's important for us to know. That's the context of this story. Samuel Morse was born in the state of, hey, we know this one, Massachusetts, in Charleston, near Boston. Okay. He was originally a painter, and actually I think a pretty darn good one. That's what he did for a living. These are a couple of his paintings, right? Back then, being a painter was, what people could do is, if you had enough money, they would hire you. You would go to their house and someone would paint a portrait, because their photography wasn't really much of a thing, you know? So people, if you wanted to have a picture of yourself for a long time, if you had to have money to do this, go to your house. It'll take a couple of days. They'd paint a picture of you. So that's what he was doing, right? He went to someone's house. He had to travel far away from home. And he painted this gentleman's, it's actually this one right here, this gentleman's picture. But while he was away, his wife became very ill. Okay. Now, the problem is his wife passed away while he was gone, but he never even knew she was sick because he was so far away. Remember what I said about messages being traveled by horseback? So he didn't even know that his wife was sick, let alone that she died. So he was very frustrated and sad when he came back because he thought, if only I could have found out earlier that she was sick, I could have gone home, I could have said goodbye to her, I could have at least said my farewells to her. And he didn't get a chance to, because, boy, there must be a better way. There's got to be a better way to communicate than us giving a message to someone on horse. But what could it be? So he was determined. He said, man, I'm not going to let this happen to anybody else. I'm not going to let this happen to anybody else where somebody dies and they don't know about it because it takes too long. So he thought, well, there's this newfangled thing that people are messing around with called electricity. Electricity has always been on Earth, by the way, but in the form of lightning and such. But he's like, this electricity thing might be promising. So he eventually invented something called the telegraph, which used electricity to send messages over long distances. Okay? And think of the telegraph, that's what it was, as the great-great-grandparents of modern-day telephones. So that came along first. And then there was the actual telephone, and then the cell phone, and then the smartphone, and all this kind of stuff, right? So how it works is you send a series of beeps over a long electrical line. And those beeps get heard by someone far, far away. And so if they hear beep, beep, well, that will be the letter A. Okay. And if the person heard beep, 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 that will be the letter B. So a dash on this Morse code chart is a long beep. It goes beep. And a dot is just a short one. Beep. So beep, just one beep, would be the letter E. Okay. And beep, beep would be I. And beep, beep, beep would be S. And he even had it for numbers. So this could be someone's job. You would have a job in the 1800s of being a telegraph operator, and someone would give you a message, they pay you money, and then you'd send all these beeps, beep, 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 and far away, someone would listen to those beeps, and they would decode your beeps and dashes, and then they would say, oh, this is for so-and-so, and this is the message. Now, yes, it would take some time to do, but they became pretty darn good at it. So the longer they were doing it, the longer they came really good at being able to do it quickly. I mean, it was still a lengthy way of doing it because you had to listen carefully. And also, if you got something wrong, you couldn't say, hey, by the way, could you repeat that last letter? No, because there was no talking through the electrical lines, just beeps. You understand? So there was no saying, like, hey, send that last code again. No. Everything was dashes and beeps. So if you didn't get it the first time, you had to just keep going, because there was no way to let them know that you messed up. So you had to be really, really good at your job. We call it a secret code, but Morse code is not really a secret, right? Lots of people know about Morse code, and we know what it is. But so here's the thing. Even today, some folks know and practice Morse code. It's still a thing. It's out there. It's been out there for a while. Now, the longer that technology has been around, we don't need Morse code anymore. The more that communication has gotten better and better, right? We don't need to send messages that way, because eventually, as I showed you, it was replaced with other things. So we didn't need it. But it was the start of other inventions, right? One invention inevitably leads to the next, which leads to the next and the next and the next. And that's how progress happens. Something like a cell phone doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It doesn't just happen like out of thin air. Lots of things have to lead up to a smartphone before that can happen. You can't just invent it from nothing. And that's why we say, thank you, Mr. Morse. Now, what I'm going to have you do is, after one more video that I want you to watch after this one, I want you to practice with another person writing a simple word, appropriate word. Remember, it's got to be something that I'd be okay with and Mr. Spazzato will be okay with. I'm going to give you a piece of paper with the Morse code on it. And I want you to think of simple words that someone else can translate. Make sure, though, the number one most important thing is that you space out the Morse code alphabet as best you can. If you cram it all together, the person is not going to be able to tell the difference between where one letter of the alphabet ends and the other begins. So maybe putting long lines, like not super long, but putting lines down like it was hangman, okay? Put the lines down, what your word's going to be, what the letter. Let's say if it's a 5-letter or 6-letter word, put 6 lines down for the letter of the alphabet. Underneath those lines, that's where you put the Morse code. Do you see what I'm saying? So underneath, if I wanted to put like Eric, I will put a line where the E is eventually going to go, and then underneath I put one dot. Then I put another line, all right, and then I put dot, dash, dot. You see what I'm saying? So don't cram them too close together, otherwise someone, and then do that. So get together with another person and come up with a code. Again, it's got to be appropriate, okay? It's got to be okay for me to see or someone else to see, and practice sending just send coded messages to each other. This is super fun. I love Morse code, and I hope that you will enjoy it too. All right, folks, I'll see you in a little. Remember, watch the other YouTube video first, though, before you do that. Okay, there's one more thing to watch.